the Iraqi tanks had been utterly outgunned. The American tanks could score a hit on the move from over 2,000 meters away. Iraqi tanks were only accurate below 1,700 meters, and they had to be stationary. Within a couple of hours, over 50 Iraqi armored vehicles were destroyed, with few American losses. Throughout the night, the Americans pursued the Republican Guard. By daybreak, they'd smashed an entire division, leaving over 100 tanks and armored vehicles smoking on the battlefield. The remaining Republican Guard divisions made a desperate retreat, and the Americans continued to hunt them down. It looked like the Americans now had the Republican Guard at their mercy. But something had happened inside Kuwait that would help save them from destruction. Iraqi troops had been fleeing from Kuwait City in any vehicle they could get their hands on. American commanders were determined to stop them. It led to one of the most controversial episodes of the war. Using laser-guided bombs, pilots attacked Iraqi vehicles along a stretch of this road leading north from Kuwait City. This created a roadblock, and behind it, hundreds of vehicles became trapped in a giant traffic jam. This made them totally vulnerable to the American aircraft overhead. Some of them were so desperate to escape that they drove off across the desert. Every available American aircraft was ordered into the attack, with devastating results. For mile after mile, charred vehicles and human corpses littered the desert and choked the two main roads going towards Iraq. An estimated 2,000 vehicles were destroyed. Only very few of them were tanks or armored personnel carriers. Most were civilian vehicles stolen by the Iraqi army as they fled Kuwait City. Nobody knows how many hundreds or thousands of Iraqis died in the attacks. The American leadership realized that pictures like these would soon be on television around the world, and they feared it would look like a massacre. This would become a key factor in deciding when to end the war. "36 hours later, coalition troops led by units from Kuwait's own army arrived in Kuwait City. The streets soon filled with vehicles as people celebrated the end of the Iraqi occupation.
Welcome in Kuwait! Welcome, Mr. Bush! Welcome!
Alongside them were American troops, greeted as heroes, as liberators of a country that had been subjected to months of horror by the Iraqi regime.
They don't have any civilization. They kill not by guns only, by torturing.
They brought them over here in this place, and they just shot them and killed them and left them for 5 days, just like a garbage.
They want to put the name Saddam in my hands, and they tell me to remember it even you are an old man.
With the liberation of Kuwait, the main political goal of the war had been achieved. But the Republican Guard had not yet been destroyed. However, President Bush feared that continuing to bomb a retreating enemy might give the impression that America was behaving like a bully. And so, on February the 28th, 1991, Bush declared a ceasefire.
I am pleased to announce that exactly 100 hours since ground operations commenced and 6 weeks since the start of Operation Desert Storm, all United States and coalition forces will suspend offensive combat operations.
The Gulf War was over. Within weeks, tens of thousands of coalition troops began the long journey home. All of them grateful that the mass casualties they'd feared had never materialized.
In total, 248 coalition troops were killed, far less than anyone had dared hope. Nobody knows how many Iraqis died, though some estimates put the figure at over 30,000, including 3,000 civilians. Despite the pre-war fears of the coalition, it had turned out to be one of the most one-sided battles in modern history.
Schwarzkopf and his men returned home to a hero's welcome. The Allies could have chased Saddam all the way to Baghdad, but they had no authority from the UN and no wish to become mired in Iraq. Instead, they hoped that Saddam would now be too weak to be a threat. But Saddam's regime did not crumble as the Americans hoped. He crushed two uprisings that followed the end of the war and remained in power for another 12 years. Several thousand US forces remained in Saudi Arabia to keep watch on Saddam's army. Osama bin Laden has claimed that it was this presence of US troops in the Muslim Holy Land of Saudi Arabia that motivated him to launch a series of attacks against American interests. This culminated in the events of September the 11th, 2001. President Bush's son, George W. Bush, was now in the White House, and in response to the 9/11 attacks, he declared a global war on terror. As part of this war, he launched a US and British-led invasion of Iraq in 2003, which ousted Saddam Hussein from power. Thousands of British and American troops remain in Iraq to this day, dealing with the consequences. No one knows when they will return home.
You can find out more about the Gulf War of 1991 in Dan's video podcast, available online now at bbc.co.uk/history. Next tonight on BBC Two, Jack D hosting Have I Got News for You?